Bugs crashing your pack's party? Whether they've got paws or sneakers, your pack deserves a home that's protected from pests. That's where Wondercide comes in. Plant-powered protection made with steam-distilled natural essential oils that actually work. It kills and repels fleas, ticks, mosquitoes, and ants without questionable ingredients or overpowering smells. Safe to use around kids and pets when used as directed. Lab-proven to work fast. And proudly made in the USA. We offer sprays for pets, people, homes, and yards. Plus, spot-on treatments, collars, and even shampoos. Whatever your pack needs, we've got it covered. Founded by a pet parent looking for a better way to protect her dog Luna, Wondercide's now protected over 21 million lives and counting. You might have even seen us on Shark Tank. Go to Wondercide.com and use code WONDER20 for 20% off your first order. That's WONDER20 at Wondercide.com. Wondercide. Protect your pack with plant-powered Wondercide today.
This is the story of the one. As a custodial supervisor at a high school, he knows that during cold and flu season, germs spread fast. It's why he partners with Grainger to stay fully stocked on the products and supplies he needs, from tissues to disinfectants to floor scrubbers. All so that he can help students, staff, and teachers stay healthy and focused. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hill String Gang or Angola 3.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Bloody Angola, a podcast 142 years in the making, the complete story of America's bloodiest prison. I'm Jim Chapman, and today I have a requested story to cover for you, and this one proves how awesome all of you who listen are, because I was not familiar with this particular story until it was brought to my attention by a fan of the show. And that is the story of Cadillac Jack Favor. So Cadillac Jack Favor was an iconic rodeo performer who was sentenced to 2 life terms in 1967 for robbery and double murder of a couple in Bossier City, Louisiana. But in 1974, he started the exoneration process and was exonerated after being housed in Bloody Angola for 7 years. And like any story, we start at the beginning with Bloody Angola, so I'm bringing you back to 1911. And I'm going to bring you to a place called Eula, Texas, which this is a very small town in the center of Texas. So small, in fact, that the population is just 125 people even today. So it's really amazing that this guy who accomplished so much, and we'll get into that, grew up in Eula, Texas. So Jack, he grew up on a ranch in Eula, and he lived what you would consider a true cowboy lifestyle. From an early age, as you would expect, he developed some pretty amazing values as it relates to hard work, resilience, discipline, all the things. You're growing up on a ranch, on a farm, basically. You're herding cattle. You are practicing rodeo skills, and we're going to get into that. It was these formative years that provided Jack with those skills that he would need later, and it would make him a standout figure in the world of rodeo. Now, by the time Jack made it to high school, he had already developed a love for competitive sports and especially the very physical nature of what's known as bronc riding. And for those of you not familiar with the rodeo world, bronc riding is an event similar to bull riding, but a rider actually mounts and attempts to ride a bucking horse for 8 seconds. The riders are judged not only on their ability to stay on the horse, but the style in which they ride, their ability to spur the horse in rhythm. And even the horse itself is judged by its bucking difficulty. So you can't get out there and get on a horse and it just prance out to the middle of the arena and doesn't buck, or maybe bucks one time. It's still going to hurt your score, even though you stayed on it for 8 seconds. Now, it was during high school that Jack started riding broncs, and he just fell in love with all things rodeo. And not only that event, we'll get into that a little bit later. So Jack, after he gets out of high school, he knew this is what he wanted to pursue as a living. But this is the late 20s, y'all. This is the Great Depression era time in America. And it's also a time in America where American pride was a big deal. And if you were a young man in those days, you were expected to serve your country before anything else. And that's just what Jack did. He served in the U.S. Navy from 1929 to 1932. In his service in the Navy, that honed Jack's work ethic even more than it was working on that farm. And it exposed Jack to a world outside of his ranch in Texas. I mean, when you're in the Navy, you travel all over the world. And he was in this little small community in Eula, Texas, with 100 people his whole life prior to this. So it just opened up the entire world to Jack. Now, rodeo in these days did not pay worth a shit. So when Jack completed his military service, he returned to Texas. And he settled in Abilene, Texas. He worked as a truck driver for a plumbing company, and he continued to rodeo part-time. And then it happened, December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy, Pearl Harbor. And Jack, like most Americans, he was outraged, and he re-enlisted in the Navy to fight in World War II. Now, years prior to that, in 1933, a lady by the name of Pearl Alexander and Jack, they get married. However, they divorced in 1941, just prior to his reenlistment. And then Jack married a lady by the name of Ponder Rhodes. And then it was off to his second stint in the military. So he serves that second stint, and then he gets back home to Texas. And he ended up going between Texas and Oklahoma a lot. That's where kind of the rodeo circuit was. And he really ramped up his rodeo career. He became absolutely dominant throughout the 1940s and 50s, traveling all over the United States. And he established himself as a fearless competitor. And it was during that time that his specialty kind of changed from bronc riding to what's known as steer wrestling. And that's also known as bulldogging, which in this event, a rider on a horse, he chases a steer, he jumps off the horse, and he wrestles the steer to the ground as quickly as possible. Now, this event requires speed and a ton of brute strength. I mean, you're literally throwing this steer to the ground as quick as you can. And it was an event which really turned Cadillac Jack into a global name when, at a rodeo in Houston, Texas, he successfully bulldogged a steer, and get this, 2.2 seconds. And that was good enough to break the world record. And interestingly enough, this record still stands today, and it cemented Cadillac Jack's status as the greatest steer wrestler in rodeo history. Now, in addition to that, Jack was also a 4-time world champion in steer wrestling. And he also stood out as a bronc buster, which would lead to one of his most iconic wins, if you will, when at Madison Square Garden, he won $18,000, a ton of money in those days, as the only cowboy to successfully ride what was known as Hell's Angel. And you just can't beat the names that they give these bulls and these broncs in rodeo, right? Now, this horse was widely regarded as the greatest bucking horse of all time. So this brings us to 1964, and Jack at this time was retired from rodeo. He was in his 50s, he was married, he had 3 children, very happy, and he became a traveling salesman, which would serve him well. He would make good money being a traveling salesman because he was very likable and he had a huge name. Everybody in that area of Texas and Oklahoma where he kind of traveled, they knew who the hell Cadillac Jack Favor was. I mean, even if you were not a huge fan of rodeo during this time in history, you still knew Jack Favor. So on April 16th of 1964, Jack was traveling to Tulsa, Oklahoma as part of his job, and he stops to eat lunch in Muskogee, Oklahoma. And it's here that he meets 2 men, a guy by the name of Floyd Chigger Cumby, that's right, his nickname was Chigger, and Donald Lee Yates. Now, also in the mid-60s, hitchhiking was a thing, and you didn't have the concerns necessarily that you have today with picking up hitchhikers. And many times you welcomed the company when you were on the road. Now, in Jack's case, he knew what it was like to have to hitchhike. Remember, he did rodeo. There were many times he would have to hitchhike from one town to another. Many times.
Jim, did you see what happened in Texas today?
Wait, before you tell me that, let me tell you what happened in New York.
It cannot be as crazy as the case I told you about yesterday in Louisiana.
You know what? We should do a podcast about it.
And with that, we did. Crime Wire Weekly covers the crime news headlines that have dominated the week.
We cover trending crimes from all over the country and even sprinkle in a few globally.
Crime Wire Weekly is available now wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Simply by searching Crime Wire Weekly or clicking the link in the description of this podcast. So after these 2 men that he met at this restaurant for lunch just by chance expressed to him that they needed a ride, he agreed as long as they were good with him making his sales call in Oklahoma and then riding with him to his next stop the following day. Jack was so nice, in fact, that when the 2 men expressed that they had no money to stay overnight anywhere, he agreed to let the men stay with him in his hotel room and just kind of bunk out on the carpet, right? So the next day, the 2 men wake up, Jack wakes up, and they drive back to Texas. And even though Jack was meeting another salesman in Houston that day, he drove several hours out of his way so that the men could start hitching rides in Louisiana. Now, the reason he did that was Texas was pretty strict on hitchhikers, Louisiana not so strict. So just to be nice, he's like, look, if you're trying to get from point A to point B here, I'll go ahead and bring you to the state line area in Louisiana. You'll have a much greater chance of hitching a ride there. Pretty nice dude, right? So on April 17th of 1964, he drops them off in Bossier City, Louisiana, and Jack leaves. He goes, he meets with this other salesman, And in the meantime, in Halton, Louisiana, which is just outside of Bossier City, Mr. and Miss W.R. Ritchie, they owned a bait and tackle shop in Halton. They were brutally murdered by those two hitchhikers, Cumby and Yates. Apparently, Cumby and Yates were convinced that the Ritchies had $60,000 hidden in their safe. So they break into the Ritchies' house and they demand the money. Now, the Ritchies, they denied having said money. So these two hitchhikers, they order these folks into the bedroom of their home. They place pillows over their head and they shoot both of them several times through those pillows, killing them. The duo then robbed the house of what they could find and they could carry, and they just flee the scene. Now, although police knew that several people were involved, they were unable to locate any leads to point to whom. Now, remember, this is still close to 40 years before DNA would be a thing, y'all. This was like what you would call real detective work. So in December of 1964, Cumby, one of those two hitchhikers, he's awaiting trial for a completely separate robbery. And this guy had a very long criminal history. So he was looking at a lot of time if he got yet another conviction for robbery. So he gets an idea and he says, I'm going to cut a deal. And he goes to the police and he says, look, I have details about the Ritchie murders. And if I can get out of this robbery trial somehow that I'm currently facing and maybe work a deal if I confess to some things, I'll share the whole story with you. So the chief deputy of Bossier Parish Sheriff's Office, a guy by the name of Val Dooley, he sits down with Cumby, and Cumby gives him this version of events. Now, according to Cumby, he was the getaway driver and the lookout, and Yates was the instigator of all this, and Jack Favor was the trigger man of the whole deal. So police, they arrest Yates, and it took a while, but on September 1st of 1965, Dooley tracks down and arrests Cadillac Jack in Texas.
You won't see the engineer that slams the Nissan Rogue's door 13,920 times. Or the corrosive chamber that simulates 15 years of life in 5 months. Or the Rogue heat-baked for over 300 combined hours. What you will see is a vehicle that can take punch after punch and keep rolling. Nissan, #1 in new vehicle quality among mainstream brands by J.D. Power. We put it through the worst, so you get its best. For J.D. Power 2025 U.S. Initial Quality Study Award information, visit jdpower.com/awards. Awards based on 2025 model year. Newer models may be shown.
And he charged him with robbery and double murder in the Ritchie case. So on November 12th of 1965, there's an extradition hearing, and this is held in Texas. And Cadillac Jack, he's like, this is all bullshit. But as we say today, he provided the receipts, quite literally. He provides a mountain of evidence in his defense. He had receipts from restaurants that he traveled to the same day and night that all of this went down. He even had gas station receipts that proved he could not have been in Bossier City or even the Bossier City area at the time of these murders. He even produced witnesses, including the salesperson he met that same day, far away from where Bossier City is, and even his wife, who testified that he was in Oklahoma and that she was visiting him the very night the Ritchies were murdered. In addition to that, police, of course, they interrogated Yates, and he verifies that Cumby was full of shit and that Cadillac Jack had nothing to do with the murders. But despite all of this evidence, after hearing Cumby's testimony, Jack Favor is extradited to Louisiana to face trial. So with the extradition pending, Jack calls Dooley and he says, hey, what if I take a lie detector test to prove my innocence because I didn't do this. And y'all are trying, for some reason, you have this tunnel vision. You're believing a guy that is nothing but trouble, has been nothing but trouble his whole life in Cumby. You're believing everything he tells you. What if I take a lie detector test to prove I'm innocent? And Dooley agrees. He says, yeah, sure. Come on down to Bossier City and we'll do a lie detector. So Favor does that. He goes to Bossier Parish Jail. He meets with some people there. I'm imagining he met with a polygrapher. And he's ready to take this lie detector test. But guess what? It was all a trick. It was all a trick just to get him back to Louisiana as quickly as possible. When he gets there, he's told, oh, there's no lie detector. If you want to talk to Dooley, you're going to need a confession. That's the only way he's going to talk to you, is if you confess to all of this. And he ends up getting stuck at the Bossier Parish Jail for a month. He loses 50 pounds while he's in there because they basically tried to starve this guy out of a confession, and eventually his attorney gets him out. So on April 24th of 1967, finally, this trial starts. Cumby, in the meantime, pleads guilty to murder with the understanding that there's going to be no death penalty involved, and he testifies against Cadillac Jack Favor. And it's discovered much later that Cumby threatened many of Jack's key witnesses, and they chose not to testify out of fear. And most of his evidence in the way of receipts, they wouldn't even admit any of that because most of those receipts lacked an attendant's signature. Even though they were receipts from the gas station, for example, in those days, the gas station attendant would sign those. And that way, especially in Jack's case, he was a traveling salesman. He could turn that over on his expense report and get paid for it. Well, many of these weren't signed because in a lot of cases, the attendants were busy with other things. And in some cases, they weren't even there. So they wouldn't admit any of that evidence. And Yates, who steadfastly stated that Cadillac Jack had nothing to do with the murders, he wasn't even allowed to testify in the trial. So this trial goes on, and then the jury gets dismissed to come up with a verdict. And on April 29th of 1967, the jury, they send a note to the judge, and they say, we can't reach a verdict. We're hung. We're a hung jury, and we just can't agree on whether Jack Favor did this. So the judge gets very frustrated. He goes and he talks to the entire jury, which is a big no-no these days, but he goes and he talks to them. And inexplicitly, as soon as he returns back, gets on the bench, guess what? The jury comes up with a verdict. And Favor is found guilty. And he's sentenced to life inside of Bloody Angola. And y'all, this 1967, that is the height of the bloody years. This is when inmates slept with mail order catalogs on their chest to avoid being stabbed. Cadillac Jack, he's on his way there for the rest of his life. Now, something very interesting happened in December of 1967. Remember Cumby? Well, for some reason, he's allowed to change his plea from murder to manslaughter. He gets resentenced, and he gets resentenced to 2 consecutive 21-year terms to be served in Bloody Angola. But he never makes it there. Now, later it was discovered his transfer to Louisiana State Penitentiary to Angola, it was faked specifically for the trial. So rather than being placed at Angola, Cumby was released and driven to Texarkana by Dooley himself, and it was under the pretense that he would go undercover as an agent for the government. Now, according to some accounts, Dooley drives him to Texarkana. He gives Cumby a gun, not a smart thing to do, and $25 in cash. However, you know how it goes. Once an asshole, always an asshole. And Cumby, just 2 days later, 2 days after being released, murders his girlfriend and her roommate for not returning valuables that he left with his girlfriend while he was incarcerated. And he even later commits an armed robbery while he's on the run for those murders. He gets caught, and of course, it's back in jail yet again for Cumby. Now, Dooley, meanwhile, he becomes sheriff, and others involved in the imprisonment of Cadillac Jack, they rise in their professional careers as well, including the attorneys who would later become judges, etc. So what happened to Yates? Well, he spent 17 years at Angola. He was released. He then robs a bank and eventually gets sentenced to federal prison in Kansas. But while at Angola, Yates and Jack Favor would cross paths. And Yates would tell Favor about the fact that Cumby never actually arrived in Angola, and that lit a fire in the ass of Jack Favor. So he starts lawyering up with what's known as jailhouse lawyers, and he starts filing appeals. And in April of 1974, he wins a new trial. And everything I just told you would explain that, right? Tons of evidence that was never admitted in trial. Key witnesses never admitted in trial, etc. So in this trial, Yates is in fact allowed to testify, and he reveals something pretty shocking. He reveals that a third party was actually involved in all of this, and this guy was an important politician, and that he and Cumby were ordered to kill whoever gave them a ride and to steal the car. However, he said Favor was so nice, the two just could not bring themselves to kill Favor in that hotel room. In that new trial, Dooley testified, and he testified when he released Cumby in Texarkana, he believed that Cumby's sentence was suspended. He said he only learned later that it was not suspended. He also testified, however, that the day before Cumby's release, he prepared fake papers authorizing Cumby's transfer to Angola. And he testified that he did not mention his plea bargain because the Bossier Parish officials didn't want him to mention it. And he said, I was only kind of following instruction from these.
You won't see the engineer that slams the Nissan Rogue's door 13,920 times. Or the corrosive chamber that simulates 15 years of life in 5 months. Or the Rogue heat-baked for over 300 combined hours. What you will see is a vehicle that can take punch after punch and keep rolling. Nissan, #1 in new vehicle quality among mainstream brands by J.D. Power. We put it through the worst, so you get its best. For J.D. Power 2025 U.S. Initial Quality Study Award information, visit jdpower.com/awards. Awards based on 2025 model year. Newer models may be shown.
Bossier Parish higher-ups. So on April 19th of 1974, after deliberating for less than 1 hour, the jury acquits Cadillac Jack Favor. And the judge allowed Favor to be released on a $5,000 bond until the state decided to drop the charges. However, because of court and he had a lot of medical expenses, look, this guy was a rodeo rider, right? He's banged up and he had a lot of medical expenses. And Favor just did not have the money to even bond out of jail after he'd already been acquitted of all this shit. That blew my mind when I came across that. Think about that, y'all. You've been acquitted. Okay, we've had you in jail for 7 years or so. Prison. Bloody Angola at that. And come to find out you didn't do this, you get acquitted by a jury and you've got to pay $5,000 until the state makes up their mind to drop the charges. Absolutely nuts. But Jack Favor still had a name. People still knew who he was. And a complete stranger, a guy by the name of Alfred Cloud, provides the bond so that Favor was able to go home with his family. Shout out to that guy. The charges against Favor were dismissed. This was on May 7th of 1974. And sadly, after finally arriving home, he suffers a stroke. He underwent a triple bypass. He had a pacemaker installed, which was replaced 3 more times before his life ended on December 27th of 1998. Now, during that time, as a matter of fact, just 2 years after his release, he also suffered from pancreatic cancer. And you may wonder, you spent 7 years in jail. It seemed like all these officials were out to get you. Did Favor sue? Well, yes, he did. He sued the state of Louisiana for wrongful imprisonment for $7 million. And that case settled, get this, for $55,000. And all of that money was used to pay his court and medical expenses. Now, in 2009, Cadillac Jack Favor, he was recognized. Of course, he was already dead, but he was recognized with being the rodeo hero he was by being inducted into the Texas Hall of Fame. That was in 2009. And even inside of Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola, he made his mark just like he did outside in the free world. While imprisoned at Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola, Favor actually played a very pivotal role, as you may expect, in elevating the prison rodeo. When he got there, it was a very disorganized event, and he helped to make that a professionally managed spectacle. And his expertise in rodeo as a performer and even as a manager brought a lot of structure to that event, which, of course, today is the largest annual prison rodeo in the entire United States. And he played a huge role in that. Wow. What a freaking story. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you. And shout out to the person that sent me that story. And look, as much as I study Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola, I can tell you, I was not familiar with this story. And after I started getting into it, I'm like, man, how the hell have I never heard of this? And that's why I love so much doing this podcast, because now you've all heard of it. Thank you so much again for listening. Thank you for supporting. Check out the Patreon, commercial-free early releases, and more. That's patreon.com/Bloody Angola podcast. We sure could use your support if you'd like to support the show. And until next time, for Bloody Angola, a podcast 142 years in the making, the complete story of America's bloodiest prison, I'm Jim Chapman. Peace.
I walk a straight line, shackled and chained. Oh, gruesome Gertie is calling my name. There is no mercy in this penitentiary. Just ask the Hill String Gang or Angola